Finally time for another build. Howdy guys, Ponchato here, and today we're going to be putting together a $1,200 gaming and content creation build. I'll be walking through all the parts, the build, and the setup process, so let's get started. So the CPU we'll be using is a Ryzen 5 2600, which is a 6-core, 12-thread processor that runs at 3.4 gigahertz base, I think. It doesn't really matter, I'm going to be overclocking it anyway. That is going to be plugged into an MSI X470 Gaming Pro motherboard. We're going to be cooling it with a Scythe Fuma Revision V, one of my favorite air coolers. For the graphics card, we'll be using a Sapphire Pulse RX 580 8GB. For the memory, we have G.Skill's Trident Z 16GB kit. This is a 3200 megahertz. The SSD is going to be an HP EX920 1TB. This is an NVMe drive, so hopefully fast. What have I not covered? The power supply is going to be a Seasonic Prime AirTouch 850 watt. It's modular, 80 plus gold, and can run fanless under low load, which is a super nice feature to have. And thanks to Deepcool for providing the case, a Matrix 55 with a tempered glass side panel. They also threw in 2 sets of their RF120 RGB fans, so this should be a pretty sweet looking build. But let's get started with the assembly. As always, it starts outside the case unless you really like making things difficult for yourself. Oh, I actually haven't opened this yet. Ooh, that's fancy. When I'm putting together a build, usually I'll just set the motherboard on its box so that it doesn't scratch out the table and you don't bend any of the pins on the bottom. So first we'll get the, wow, I haven't opened any of this stuff. Handy dandy knife. I take that back. I think I have opened the RX 580. First we'll get the processor out of the box and install that on the motherboard. I did it, I opened the box. And even though this does come with a stock cooler, and AMD stock coolers are actually pretty good, we aren't gonna be using that. So we'll just get the processor out of the packaging. So installing these is pretty easy. Lift up the latch, line up the gold mark on the processor with the marking on the socket, and put the latch back down. Done. Now before we install the CPU cooler, I'm going to install the RAM and the SSD first, which is a fairly easy process as long as you can get the package open. SSDs have a tiny little screw. Make sure you don't lose that. Otherwise you will be sad and your life will be harder. So it goes in at an angle, then we'll screw it down and the SSD is installed. Like I said, very easy. Next we'll install the RAM. That is good looking memory. So there are markings on the motherboard, say to use these 2 slots first, which is very convenient. They often aren't marked like that, but as usual, you just point the stickers toward the CPU and the memory is lined up with the notch correctly. There we go. Okay, so we have the memory and the SSD installed, and now we're gonna install the CPU cooler, which is a big boy. So now to install the Fuma, it's actually a pretty easy process, on AM4 at least. It's presumably easy on LGA 1151 too, but I've never installed it on that socket. Fan mounts, I probably shouldn't be putting those directly on the motherboard. So the first step with installing the Fuma is to remove the stock mounting brackets, not the stock back plate, just the mounting brackets on the top. Next we put on the 4 nylon spacers, then the 2 mounting brackets. I'm pretty sure I have these aimed the right way. Now we'll add a little bit of thermal grease, and before this blows up all over my hand, I'm going to very carefully get it started. There we go. That's probably good. Now we install the cooler. Don't forget to take off that plastic thing, otherwise you will have a bad time. It's not an issue. Once the cooler is in place, I can set the crossbar down. There we go, and tighten down the crossbar. And now we'll install the CPU fans. So what I'm gonna do here is a non-standard mounting of the fans because I want to have this thing sitting flush. The G.Skill memory is pretty tall, so it would block the front fan. It'll fit, but I want it to look pretty. There we go. Now I'm actually going to redo the middle fan so that it's mounted to the front tower. And we're good. And now we're gonna use the PWM Y splitter so that both fans are, oops, actually hooked up to the motherboard. There we go. So it does look a little weird because the fans are on the back. That should work just fine. Now we'll start assembly inside the case. That starts by taking off the tempered glass side panel, safely setting it aside. Now the first thing I'm going to do in here is put in the rest of the motherboard standoffs, and those go into these 3 mounting holes inside the case. Now before we put the motherboard in there, I'm going to stick the back plate into the case. There we go. And now we'll put the motherboard into the case. Easy to line everything up. So we'll tighten down the motherboard and get it installed. Now that we have the motherboard installed, we're going to put in the GPU. That's fancy right there. Good looking backplate too. Now the first thing we're gonna have to do is take off the expansion slot covers on the back. Only the top one is replaceable. The rest of them are the bend and snap kind. I'm gonna set that down before it drops. And now all we need to do is line it up. Am I stupid? I've identified the problem. The first PCIe slot is not lined up with the first slot back here. Okay, I'm just gonna take this whole thing out because it's hard to deal with. Ooh. Ah, you didn't see that. I caught that thing like right at the edge of the table. Ow. Ow, that hurt. Okay, I just pinched myself. That's why you don't look away while you're working on something in a computer. There we go. Now this should just pop into place. Beautiful. We'll hold it in place with the 2 screws. Let me put this back plate thing back on. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. This needs to go in before the GPU. Okay. Let's fix it. There we go. Okay. Really, I guess that thing never needs to come out of the case to begin with. Lessons learned. All right. Now the GPU is installed. And next we'll put in all of the case fans. I'll start at the front of the case. And the first step is to pop off the front panel. Carefully. We're good. I'm also going to take off the back panel so I can move the wires around a little bit. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do, set this down. Okay, with the front panel off, now we have access to the fan mounting locations. Now these fans come with basically all the hardware and wiring you might need, but all we're going to be using is the PWM splitter and the LED splitter to hook it up to the front panel LED control. So I went ahead and got all the fans and the mounting hardware out of the boxes, and now we'll start by installing the 3 fans on the front of the case here. I'm going to go around to the side. I'm going to take out the hard drive trays so that I can get access to this lowest fan mounting point. The next one will go roughly right here. You know, I probably should have pre-threaded these outside the case first. I'm gonna try that on the next one. So hopefully it'll be easier to install inside the case. There we go. Next, we'll do the top fans. So the Matrix 55 has a magnetic dust filter on the top. Popping that off, we have all the fan mounting locations. And I'm gonna install 2 exhaust fans at the top. There we go. And now we're gonna install the last exhaust fan. There we go. All right, now we're gonna put the power supply in. Fancy. Installation is easy enough. Goes in face down, or fan down, I guess. And with that, the power supply is installed. Now we're gonna have to deal with cables. Actually, you know what, before we do that, I'm gonna do a quick test boot to make sure that this all works before we do anything else. Okay, so I got it all wired up, and now we're gonna turn it on, and hopefully everything will start spinning if I can find the power button. Oh baby, tight. What about this LED control? Looks like it's working. Cool. So next we'll deal with all of these cables, which is going to be a long process. Oh boy. Okay, now for the cable management, probably just gonna do a time lapse since I don't need to walk you through. pulling cables through holes for 45 minutes. Here we go. Tight. And there we go. Cable management is all done. That was a longer process than I thought, but the large space behind the motherboard tray in the Matrix 55 does help a whole lot. Now all that's left is to install Windows and get everything set up. With it all set up, check that out. That's pretty right there. So I skipped the Windows install, but if you want to see how to do it, I'll add a card and a link in the description to one of my other build videos where I walk through the process of setting Windows up. But for now, let's check out how this build handles some gaming. First up, we'll look at Overwatch. Not necessarily a tough title to run, but maxed out, it can bog down some lower end systems. With this build though, that's not the case. I get around 90 to 100 FPS on epic settings and essentially no stuttering, which makes for an extremely smooth experience even while screen recording. Next, we'll check out GTA 5. With the settings mostly maxed out, I get around 70 to 75 FPS even while flying through traffic. Like Overwatch, stuttering is minimal to non-existent. The only settings I didn't max out were in the advanced graphics menu, like long shadows and extended distance scaling. But these have a very minor effect on appearance while having a major effect on performance, so they aren't really worth enabling to begin with. Now here's PUBG. On Ultra, the game incredibly hovers around 65 to 70 FPS, despite its still awful optimization. There is some occasional stuttering, mostly when new textures or models are brought into view, but it is minor and mostly a non-issue. Rainbow Six Siege, on the other hand, runs absolutely beautifully. Maxed out on Ultra settings, I'm still getting 90 frames per second with basically no stuttering, and this game actually looks amazing on Ultra, so it's well worth it to max out the graphics here. Last but not least, let's see how Fortnite performs. On epic settings, I'm getting a pretty consistent 65 to 75 frames per second. Fortnite does seem to have a bit of trouble with stuttering, but it's not hard stuttering, only dropping to about 40 FPS for those singular slow frames. Overall though, this isn't really noticeable while playing, and it's a very nice, smooth experience. So there you have it. For 1,200 bucks, this is a pretty sick build and can handle just about any game at 1080p on max settings at over 60 FPS. Plus, the Deepcool Matrix 55 case and RF120 fans integrate together perfectly. Follow the link in the description to pick up these parts for yourself. Hit subscribe and click the bell icon to get notified of new videos as soon as they're up. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you want to see more, hit subscribe, and I want to hear from you. Are you going RGB on your next build? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, I hope I helped, and I'll see you in the next video. Because we don't like saggy bits in our, in our computers. I shouldn't put that in. Hashtag mature. I need tools. That was dangerous. The power supply is gonna be an a Seasonic 8, oh my goodness gracious. Done.